Everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kara, and I'm with the Ohio LTAP Center here at ODOT, and I will be your host for this webinar. Today's webinar is Deer Carcass Disposal Results Presentation, Research, and we are excited to have Sam Robbins and Olive Stringer as our presenters today. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items to ensure a smooth webinar experience for everyone. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the questions panel on your screen. You can type your questions there and we'll address them during the Q&A session at the end. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties or have any other issues, feel free to use the chat panel to communicate with our team and we'll do our best to assist you. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to all registered attendees after the session. All right, with that out of the way, let's get started. It's my pleasure to hand it over to Sam. Sam, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Kara. Great introduction. Very excited to be here. I am here with my colleague, Olive. Hi. To eliminate any confusion, we are actually sitting immediately across from each other. However, we are talking through my microphone. So when you see that it looks like I'm talking, it's actually her. And so we're actually going to turn our cameras off just so there's no lag time on the presentation itself. And we're going to get rolling. So welcome to our presentation. We are very excited to have folks from around the nation joining us today. We are here to talk about our dearly departed and what happens next. So we wanted to get ahead of the holidays. So this material is actually being presented prior to the finalization of the research. So I just wanted to make this clear that we are still providing the final deliverables to ODOT. So all of this is still subject to change pending their review and confirmation of the material. So we do have this presentation will be uploaded online and it will be available. However, the content and any ancillary handouts that we would have, we are going to wait until those get final reviewed first. So those will be forthcoming and our contact information will be at the end. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We do have a large audience today, so the beauty in having this presentation before the final deliverables are going out is that you can still give us a holler if you have something you're just like, whoa, what did you guys consider this? And we would love to hear if there's something else in there that we have not considered. Or something that other states might be doing that we had not touched on. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. We will wait till questions till the end of this presentation, and we are hoping to have some time for that. This topic has been a real hit, unfortunately, so have the deer. But our research does aim to make what happens next a little safer and smarter. So due to the nature of this content, this presentation does contain some graphic images. That is my disclaimer. And we're going to move in. So the project team for this research was Stone Environmental. We were the principal investigators, myself and Olive, working in conjunction with the University of Akron. The University of Akron PM was Ala Abbas, and then our Ohio research team and the technical advisory committee that was the sponsor of the research. Shout out to April Knoll and Greg Glover with District 2, and then Matt Perlick, our assistant environmental administrator, and Mohammed Merrick with central office as well. He's our regulatory coordinator, the materials management coordinator. So thank you all for the involvement in our technical advisory committee that really steered the direction of this research. So this research really was driven by an issue in District 2. A question was raised. There were limitations of disposal methods up in that district. So we really ran into a concern with right-of-way availability to be able to abandon these on the roadside like they typically had as a standard practice across the nation of abandoning them in the roadway, but we had limitations on that disposal method and also on landfill disposal. And that's really kind of contributed with the disease transmission concerns. And so we wanted to look at this project from a 30,000 foot level of what kind of methods would be best when you're considering your various resources between districts. There's not really one size fits all. But those were the problems that we were trying to address, is how do we consider disease transmission with each of these disposal methods, and what are the limitations of those methods. So our goals were to develop a guidance document that compares our existing methods with alternative disposal methods. And we really wanted to dive into the costs, the resource requirements, the health and safety components, regulatory compliance. So what's the complexity of the agency coordination needed to make sure you have your guardrails in place with EPA, ODNR, such like that. And then the biosecurity. So we wanted to make sure that our recommendations are aligned with the current research that is out there about disease transmission. Our approach with this research, we really dug into a literature review. I will say there's plenty of great literature out there. There's no need to recreate a wheel. There's a lot of DOTs that have done great work on this already, and we definitely capitalized on that. So thank you for having that stuff and really available. That's what's great about this industry, is that it's a lot of information sharing. And leading into that, we had a lot of district surveys. So ODOT internally, we did some surveys and interviews. We really wanted to talk to the maintenance staff themselves, who are really performing this work, and what the challenges are that they're seeing, you know, boots on the ground. And then we did an external DOT survey. We actually sent out a survey on the AASHTO board, and we got a lot of feedback. And that drove us to do some additional interviews as well with certain DOTs. So that was our approach on making sure we were talking to everybody. Once we kind of leveled on what the options were, we started reaching out to the manufacturers and the suppliers themselves and interviewed, you know, what's the limitations, what's the benefits, what's the cons of their equipment, you know, citing requirements, things like that, really interviewing and getting the nitty gritty of each of those methods. And then again, looking at that regulatory agency coordination, we had a lot of discussions with Ohio EPA and Ohio Department of Natural Resources. The DEER program administration team, thank you very much. You guys spent a lot of time walking us through what the current expectations are when handling these deer. So I do want to make a note that this project was limited to deer only, so no other animals or their associated diseases were studied. Just trying to get that to go. So our current deer carcass disposal methods in Ohio, these are our primary methods: our roadside abandonment, landfill disposal, and composting. We have actually 2 composting facilities. The roadside abandonment, that is the primary method. It is the most cost effective. However, it is malodorous. A lot of neighbors start complaining with the smell. It is unsightly. There is potential for natural resources contamination when we start looking at the diseases and the bioaccumulation, especially of chronic wasting disease, which I'll get into a little bit more. The roadside abandonment does attract scavengers, and that kind of feeds into more of that disease transmission. And then the right-of-way availability was really the major concern with being able to abandon on the roadside. So if you have, you know, limited right-of-way, you're in the urban areas, or you have a lot of development around you, that was a major concern that we had with the primary method that we have right now. And then there is the solid waste designation, and I know we'll probably say this multiple times today, but as soon as you pick up the carcass, it is considered a solid waste and has to be managed as such per the EPA. So you can drag it within the right of way, but once we are relocating it, then it needs to be handled as such. So we really wanted to dive in to make sure we were crossing all our T's, dotting all our I's with the disposal methods and the regulations. So more of our challenges were the volume. Obviously, deer population is increasing everywhere, but in Ohio especially. We've had a lot more deer getting hit on the road because there are a lot more deer in general. There's also a lot more traffic. So we have this, so it really kind of turns this periodic task of dealing with the carcasses, and it kind of turns it into this daily operational burden. There's also this developing landscape of a lot more residential developments coming in. So then you have less places that you can maybe have comfortably dispose of them along the right of way as you were able to before. So this map kind of just shows the concentrations of the deer carcass volumes that are being reported currently. Of course, there is a surge of numbers in October and November when we have the rut here in Ohio. Another new challenge is the diseases. So we really dove into the chronic wasting disease. That is a fatal neurological prion disease. It is a misfolded protein that creates holes in the brain tissue, leading to symptoms like emaciation, lack of coordination, and unusual behavior in the deer. It is spread through direct contact or contaminated materials in the environment, and it can persist in the environment for years. So it can be killed at 1,000 degrees Celsius or with 40% bleach solution for 5 minutes. And that bleach solution is only on non-porous surfaces. And that is what the current studies are showing in the current research. So we are aware that there's more research going on to really navigate the prions that are in CWD and what can be done to mitigate our risk of disease transmission. But right now, that is what the current research is showing. We do have a concentration of CWD in Northwest Ohio. We have, those are our deer positive counties, and that is aligned with where District 2 is as well. So District 2 not only has limited right-of-way to abandon, but then they also had to consider their chronic wasting disease and how we wanted to manage that. So when we're looking at disposing of these deer carcasses, there is no strong evidence currently that it's transmissible to humans. However, the CDC does caution against eating meat from deer that have tested positive. Again, further research is coming on that. Another disease of concern that we looked at here in Ohio, and it's very, very prevalent, is the EHD disease that is spread by biting midges. And we are currently experiencing the worst outbreak to date of EHD in Ohio with over 8,700 cases in 2025 alone as of October 2nd. So that's actually 4 times higher than the total number of cases in 2024. So it's been a wild ride this year. And I know ODNR has been really busy trying to monitor and mitigate that with the hunting season upon us. The outbreaks are concentrated down in Southwest Ohio, down in Athens, Meigs, Monroe, Noble, and Washington counties. This, for EHD, a temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit or a bleach solution will kill it. Another disease of concern that we were kind of forward thinking on is the bovine tuberculosis. That's a bacterial known to infect humans, and it's currently in Michigan and Indiana, but it is not in Ohio yet. So as we're looking at identifying the alternative carcass disposal methods, we really wanted to understand how Ohio and other states are disposing of the deer carcasses. We wanted to know where we are so that we can figure out where we want to go. We wanted to really dive into some new technologies, consider the workers' experience and the environmental impacts, and then really identify that regulatory complexity and limitations of each of those methods. So our resources, of course, in the literature review, we looked at a lot of academic journal databases, government agencies, again, ODOT, Ohio EPA, ODNR. Thank you very much for being such readily available resources and willing to work with us. There were other state departments of transportation as well. Very many of you guys had participated in the survey, and then once we received the survey results, we had ongoing conversations. Actually, to the point one asked if they could start billing, which was true, but it was very, very helpful. So thank you specifically, Utah, Indiana, Kentucky, Virginia, and Montana for your phone conversations. It was really helpful in aiding our findings. So for our project deliverables, this is just beyond a research report. We really wanted to have something that was useful for our DOT folks. So the deliverables themselves are actually going to be incorporated into section 800 of the product and waste management manual of how we handle these carcasses. So we wanted to update the existing guidance document. Within that, there's a matrix to compare the methods that we had dove into, and then there's associated fact sheets that go into even more detail with that. So for the matrix considerations, we really wanted to just dive into each of these methods. What we considered when we were trying to compare apples to apples was looking at the cost of each of the methods. So that initial versus operational, we wanted to gauge the level of disease transmission risk, regulatory complexity. Obviously, there's seasonal limitations to some of the methods. Some work better in the summer, or availability of resources in the winter versus the summer. Worker acceptance was a big one for us because we really, the boots on the ground doing this work, we want to make sure that we're making it as as seamless as we can for them. And you have to have a strong stomach for this work, let's be honest. So some of those guys, you know, like, oh, it's not a problem, I love doing this, and other people, it's kind of hard to retain staff. So when we look at worker acceptance, it kind of really feeds into that cost as well, because you want to be able to have staff retention. It gets pretty hard to retrain staff over and over again if you're not retaining folks with a process that's you know, a bit more streamlined. So we also looked at the facility and site requirements that is needed for each of the disposal methods, and then the volume capacity. So our criteria for feasibility, there's a lot of different disposal methods out there. So we wanted to really hone in on which methods we wanted to have the detailed information that could be tools for our staff. So we looked at the cost effectiveness, the low risk of disease transmission. We want to make sure it was efficient for your time and your volume, and that it was a moderate to low regulatory complexity. Now, there's nothing that fits all of these, right? So it's really going to be dependent on what your specific garage, what your maintenance staff, what your state has available in resources. It is very variable depending on your volume and the readily available resources that you have. But if you have something that's cost effective, we're going to throw that in there. If there's something that was really efficient, that stayed in there, even if it had you know, a higher regulatory complexity. We dove through a lot of methods. These were our methods that we deferred. So these were methods we started to look into, and then we had agreed as a team that they just were not the methods that we wanted to move forward and get into any more detail on. However, they are still some great options if it's something that is readily available to your own scenario. So rendering, it was a really high cost, but it was a low availability for us in Ohio, and the disease transmission risk was a bit higher. Donations, so we actually do have in Ohio, some folks do donate carcasses to zoos or for research, but it's not really appropriate for large volumes. It's not like a blanket one side, you know, not everybody can just keep donating all their carcasses. And then of course, disease management influenced that not being a great option that could be used for everybody. So we looked at roadside burial. It was unreliable and inconsistent, and still not preferred for disease transmission. Alkaline hydrolysis, that was a much higher regulatory complexity. A mobile incinerator, we did look into incineration, that is included in one of the methods, but the mobile incinerator was ruled out as infeasible. And then the biodigestion is actually a really cool new concept to Ohio, at least. We were pretty excited to dive into it, but it ended up not being feasible for the scope of deer carcass removal. However, we did put a slide together about biodigestion just to spread the good word about it, because we were really excited. It does utilize enzymes, and it heats. It utilizes enzymes and heat to aerobically digest organic matter into nutrient-rich fertilizer. So it's waterless, it's odorless, there's no carbon source, there's no carbon off-gassing, and it's just this continuous cycle of digestion. It was a really strong option. Like if you have smaller animals, I know we started looking into it for maybe fish waste, and processing kind of the fish cleaning station waste is what it's being considered for. But for large carcasses, it wasn't feasible because it would require some pre-processing. You needed that organic matter going in there to be in smaller pieces. So you'd really have to like shred the deer before you put it in. And we figured that would not get a lot of buy-in with the maintenance staff. And if it did, maybe you don't want that staff. So anyway, we passed on that one for the deer carcass scope, but I would still recommend considering it for other organic matter processing. So these were the methods that we advanced for the matrix evaluation. So we looked at roadside abandonment, landfill disposal, windrow and bin composting, rotary drum composting, incineration, and then a contract service. So contracting it all out so somebody else can do it and the DOT just signs paperwork, and that sounds great. However, I am going to go ahead and pass the buck over to Miss Olive.
All right. Thanks, Sam. Everyone bear with me. My voice is a little bit scratchy because I'm getting over sinus infection. But you know, it's a little late for Halloween, but I'm going to tell you how to get rid of the bodies. So let's get into the venison of it all. So our first method is roadside abandonment. As Sam mentioned, roadside abandonment is the primary carcass disposal used throughout Ohio, and it's also commonly used by other state DOTs. And roadside abandonment is the process of dragging carcasses to the nearest available right-of-way, away from residential developments, otter bodies, ditches, and livestock pastures to allow natural decomposition to occur. And these carcasses should be covered to help hide the body from scavengers and the public with cover materials such as wood chips, mulch, and sawdust. These cover materials really help aid in decomposition, but it should be noted that lime should not be used as it actually slows the decomposition process. As I mentioned, roadside abandonment is very common. It's the current practice, so there's low regulatory complexity associated with this method. However, there is a caveat that I'm going to dig into a little bit later. It does not require any additional equipment. ODOT crews are already using this process, and there is very minimal handling, as these carcasses do not have to be loaded into a truck and transported to a second location. Unfortunately, these carcasses cannot be picked up through this method. They cannot leave the ground. Otherwise, per Ohio EPA, it is then considered solid waste and must be disposed of as such. Crews cannot take the carcass in the truck and transport it 500 meters down the road. That would be considered open dumping, so we want to avoid that. With these carcasses being left out in the open, there is risk of natural resource contamination, especially with surface water, and these carcasses can attract scavengers such as vultures, crows, possums, or raccoons. So there's really high risk of disease transmission and bioaccumulation of CWD prions in the environment. And as the landscape is developed, there is limited availability of space that is away from residential or commercial developments, and it's a stinky process overall. So again, because this is common practice, crews already have shovels and other tools they can use to drag carcasses to right-of-way, and theoretically, crews will be able to source cover materials such as mulch or wood chips through existing projects, source them in-house. Otherwise, they will have to be purchased elsewhere. And again, as soon as these carcasses are picked up, they're technically considered to be solid waste by Ohio EPA. But this is one of only 2 methods recommended by Ohio EPA and ODNR for counties with CWD. And the reasoning behind this is that while roadside abandonment scored high for risk of disease transmission, the carcass is more or less contained in the location it died. And so there's not a risk of disease spread through transporting the carcass to a secondary location, such as a landfill. You're going to see that for each method, we recommend that ODOT crews follow proper traffic safety protocol and wear standard PPE. And this includes safety glasses or goggles, masks, nose plugs to help reduce odor, rubber gloves and rubber boots, especially, as these can be disinfected with bleach later on, and then perhaps an apron or some sort of clothing covering that can be disposed of later on. Overall, we really just want to emphasize that workers should try to minimize carcass handling as much as possible to help reduce possible spread of diseases. Our next method is landfill disposal. As I mentioned with roadside abandonment, this also has low regulatory complexity, and it doesn't require additional equipment, as ODOT crews are already using this process in the field today. But unfortunately, these carcasses are still being left out in the open, which can attract scavengers. And while there are many landfills across Ohio, both public and private, not all of them accept carcasses, deer carcasses in particular. So ODOT crews need to call ahead to make sure that the landfills will accept these carcasses before dumping them, and making sure that they're within a reasonable distance. Otherwise, you're looking at additional costs with mileage and fuel. So ODOT crews can expect it to cost around $10 to even $35 to dump each deer, depending on the landfill. And this can get quite expensive, especially for counties or districts with higher volumes of carcasses. With roadside abandonment, landfill is another method recommended by Ohio EPA and ODNR for counties with confirmed CWD. And along with previously mentioned safety considerations, crews should also follow proper waste transport protocol and use a liner in the truck bed to help prevent leaks during transportation that can also be disinfected after every dump. Now we have windrow and bin composting. And this is a form of compost where carcasses are covered and layered with bulking agent like deer tiramisu or diramisu, if you will. And so these carcasses are again left to kind of compost outside. And so this can be in the form of long windrows or more contained within a bin system. And both methods require routine monitoring to ensure that these piles reach the proper temperatures and humidity levels. They also need to be turned after 90 days into the process. And at minimum, this process takes 9 months to fully break down the carcasses, because in Ohio, there should not be any evidence of bones or teeth in the finished project. So windrow and bin composting is relatively low tech compared to our other methods. There is the opportunity for facilities to incorporate forest aeration systems into their designs. However, this is quite costly, and you're looking at a minimum of $10,000 to install these systems, and there's a wide range depending on the size of the facility, but that can help speed up the process. And composting, the end product, can actually be repurposed into other ODOT projects as long as the deer are not being sourced in a CWD positive county, because again, there is a lack of research on how composting reduces the infectivity of CWD. So while studies have shown that composting can kill bacteria such as Salmonella or E. coli, this is through ensuring that these piles are reaching proper temperatures of approximately 120 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit and 40 to 60% humidity for prolonged periods. Again, there's just limited research on whether composting is a safe disposal method for CWD infected carcasses. However, Montana Department of Transportation is looking to rectify that, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more later. So again, these piles are left out in the open and exposed to wildlife and seasonality. So cold winter temperatures can prolong this already extensive 6-month period, of which the piles have to be monitored for correct temperature and turned throughout. This process also requires a reliable supply of carbon sources, which again can increase cost if these carbon sources are not sourced in-house. And so again, because this process takes so long, there is greater labor and time. It's great. There's more labor and time costs associated with using this practice. But thankfully, most ODOT garages should have the proper equipment to maintain and turn these piles, such as forklifts, bobcats, trucks with lift gates, wheelbarrows. So that's another factor to keep in mind. As for regulations, there's 4 classes currently of compost facilities in Ohio that differ in the types of waste they can process and regulations they must follow. So deer composting requires a Class 3 compost facility license, as well as a solid waste and infectious waste treatment facility license. And this application and renewal fee has a cost of approximately $400, but this really varies on the size of the facility. While facilities apply for these licenses through Ohio EPA, it's actually the local health department that enforces it and conducts site inspections. Additionally, about every 20,000 cubic yards of compost produced has to be sampled and sent to a lab for testing, just to make sure that the facilities are complying with Ohio revised code. Next, we have rotary drum composting. And this is a different form of composting that applies heat and actually routinely turns the mixture in the drum, reducing the processing time to as little as 10 to 14 days. So with this process, there's a lot less handling than windrow and bin composting because the technology turns the material for you. It's an enclosed system, so you reduce attracting scavengers to the carcasses. And again, this compost can be repurposed as long as these deer carcasses are not being sourced in a CWD positive county. Similar to windrow and bin composting, there's a lack of research on pathogen destruction through rotary drum composting. And part of this is because this advanced technology can get a little finicky with the environment within the drum, making sure it reaches the appropriate temperatures necessary for decomposition and pathogen destruction. There's also high initial costs with these units. And again, facilities would have to find reliable supply of carbon sources. So this method can use the same equipment mentioned for windrow and bin composting, but like I mentioned, it does require a reliable supply of carbon sources, and units cost approximately $50,000 to $100,000. So that is quite costly, especially when you think about the routine maintenance and repair this unit might require later on. Rotary drum facilities will require the Class 3 and solid waste and infectious waste treatment facility licenses like traditional composting. However, there's a higher emphasis on operations and maintenance training associated with this more advanced technology. And now we have incineration. So obviously incineration is reducing the organic waste to ash. The models that we looked at can reduce each carcass to ash in approximately 1 to 3 hours. So when we're looking at batches that, or models that have a batch capacity of about 1,200 pounds, it takes up about 12 hours to fully process each of these batches. And so the pros with incineration is that it has the highest biosecurity out of all of our methods. So it's going to kill bacteria, viruses, parasites, and more robust models that we identified will kill CWD as they will reach temperatures in excess of 1,000 degrees Celsius. There's no pre-processing required with this method. It's the fastest method, and it's actually widely used in other states. In fact, incineration is Indiana DOT's primary carcass disposal method, and they first began implementing incineration as early as 1992. So they've been at it for a few decades. And this ash can actually be repurposed, again, for fertilizer or just in other ODOT projects, again, as long as we're not repurposing ash from CWD positive counties. That ash should be taken straight to the landfill. And a lot of these models are scalable. So depending on the volume needs of each individual county or district, they can purchase the appropriate model and batch capacity size. Unfortunately, with incineration, there is higher costs associated with operational training, safety as well. So we want to make sure that these crews and operators are being fully trained before they operate the incinerators and have refresher courses throughout the year. And so these units will require routine maintenance, such as replacing afterburners. And when we interviewed other state DOTs, they reported that there's a very minimal odor with these incinerators as long as they're being properly loaded. So we identified 2 models for our case study and our cost analysis. The R&K model 428 incinerator has an initial cost of approximately $20,000, and this has a burn temperature of around 760 degrees Celsius. So this will not kill CWD. However, the Elastec MetaBurn 30 costs approximately $50,000. So it's a bit more costly, but it will kill CWD and could be an option for districts and counties that are concerned about biosecurity. Installation costs range from approximately $5,000 to $10,000, and most of these incinerators use diesel for a fuel source. There are additional costs associated with permitting and license, as well as compliance training and testing. But as for regulations, these facilities have to obtain a permit to install and operate, and again, a solid waste and infectious waste license through Ohio EPA. However, Ohio EPA also confirmed that incineration facilities in Ohio processing only deer carcasses would not require a Title V or any local air permits. So that's a bonus. When we interviewed Kentucky and Indiana DOTs, they also reported that their facilities did not require any air permits as well, which we know that Ohio EPA has different regulations for Ohio, but federally it would not require an air permit. And so this is a more advanced disposal method. It does require that each operators are fully trained prior to utilizing the incinerators. So we just want to make sure that everyone is properly trained on how to use them to reduce maintenance in the future and make sure that everyone is undergoing routine refresher training throughout the year. On our last method, we have a contract service case study. So we were in close contact with Utah Department of Transportation and discovered that Utah is divided into 4 regions. And of those 4 regions, 3 entirely contract the deer carcass disposal out to a pest control service. So the main contractor in Utah is EcoLife, and UDOT designated set patrol routes for EcoLife to patrol at least twice a week. And so EcoLife is paid per mileage, and they also invoice UDOT for dump receipts. In the contract, UDOT outlines that the contractors have to use a carcass reporting app that UDOT developed. And so this app tracks the geographic location of these carcasses, and additionally, patrols must use GPS location tracking just to ensure that everything is compliant and the contractors are doing the work that they were contracted to fulfill. So now we have our matrix. This is one of our deliverables. It includes the 6 identified disposal methods and a summary of considerations that we just discussed, such as cost and regulatory compliance. As you can see, several categories were scored for visual aid in a brief comparison of the categories. And so ideally, districts and crews will begin with a guidance document, which houses the matrix to identify methods of interest, which then directs districts to individual, highly detailed fact sheets that provide information on the process, equipment, cost, regulatory considerations, as well as readily available sources, so that districts can take a look at examples of these methods in use or just more research in general. So overall, for the highest biosecurity of deer carcass disposal in CWD counties, we recommend the use of incinerators, as these certain models will reach the 1,000 degrees Celsius threshold to destroy CWD prions. But as we mentioned, both roadside abandonment and landfill disposal are traditional methods recommended by Ohio EPA and ODNR counties, or ODNR for counties where incineration is not possible. So additionally, ODOT may consider designating set routes for carcass patrol based off of animal vehicle collision hotspots, or perhaps during the rut season, which we're in right now, to ensure that carcasses are processed within, we hope, for 24 hours of death. You know, we want to make sure these carcasses aren't left to decompose on the roadside, as that makes pickup much harder and messier for the crews. So a carcass reporting app or survey like UDOT uses may also be developed for both public and personnel, ODOT personnel, to track geographic location of collisions. And this data can be used for determining hotspots and just more efficient processing. Most importantly, we really want to stress that each district is different. They have varying budgets, resources, disease concerns, and more. So our guidance documents are just meant to aid each district in developing their own carcass management plan that fits their own individual needs. And before any method is implemented, we really recommend that districts should consult their local Ohio EPA office to ensure it's compliant with federal, state, and local regulations. In particular, districts may want to consider reaching out to the Air Pollution Control Office, Environmental Innovation, Materials and Waste, and Management of Surface Water. So just to summarize, We developed the guidance document as a starting point for districts to understand a brief overview of carcass disposal and general practices in Ohio. And so the guidance document contains the matrix, which scores each method, provides key takeaways for important criteria, and once one or more preferred methods have been identified by the district, they can visit the fact sheets, which include a higher level of detail about these individual methods. And so all of these materials are housed in section 800 of ODOT's Project and Waste Management Manual. Once more, we just want to emphasize there's no one size fits all with deer carcass disposal. And what may work for one district's needs is not necessarily going to meet the needs of another. There's also a need for additional research on the degree of pathogen destruction offered by each method, in particular how compost affects the infectivity of CWD. So fortunately, like I mentioned earlier, Montana DOT is kicking off a new research project assessing CWD presence in their compost piles and their end product. So as this research develops, we're going to make sure that we keep our documents up to date and we keep an ear out for what they find. So with that, that's the end of our presentation, and we'd love to take any questions. Thank you so much for attending.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Sam and Olive.
Thank you.
That was great. So we do just so far have just a couple of questions. So we had a question from someone who wanted to know if while you were investigating incineration, if you looked at biochar producing methods and if that would work.
No, unfortunately, we did not come across that method. It's very interesting you mentioned it. So that's something we're going to have to take a look at, but we did not come across biochar.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's see here. Someone shared that they attended an event where they expressed the potential to adopt using car cameras to identify potholes and carcasses, and that it had been 90% successful in other states that have implemented it. So I guess just a little food for thought there.
Yeah, what would be great for managing deer carcass disposal is to have less of them. So anything that'll lead us to that point would be great. ODOT has done a good amount of research on hotspot analysis and trying to get some mitigation options for reducing animal vehicle collisions. So I know that is a strong focus for ODOT as well. Unfortunately, this scope was focused on, well, now we have them, what do we do?
Wonderful. Let's see. Okay. So this is a long one. It starts with a question, and then we've got some information in between, and then it ends with a question. So here we go. First question is, what is the throughput of the incinerator? Throughput of carcasses can be increased if the incinerator does not require a cool down between loads. Carcasses can be loaded into the incinerator at top burn temp if a mechanical arm is used. Some box trailers include a crane mechanical arm that can be used by the operator to lift carcasses off the roadside and into the burn box, thereby reducing workplace injuries. And then they also ask which fuel type is best.
Okay, so I'll address that last question. So for fuel type, it is a lot easier for ODOT facilities to use diesel, as they're already using diesel for a lot of other equipment. However, sources such as natural gas or propane do typically burn higher. So you'll see that with other models that have a higher burn temp, they typically use propane or natural gas. The model 428 does provide the option to use either of those three as a fuel source. As for throughput,
That throughput's going to vary between districts and what your need is, and it's going to also vary based on the model that is chosen. So I think, yeah, any kind of information that aids in making sure that this work can be done as safely as possible. Those are items that were addressed deeper into the research report. So thank you for bringing that up, whoever's question/comment that was. But that throughput, there is a lot more calculations within our research paper itself regarding the volume that each district is currently managing right now, and how they can try to manage that best with each of these methods.
Great, thank you, Olive and Sam, for that answer. Okay, next question. Did this research project include an assessment of roadkill across the nation?
no, so our scope was limited to Ohio. So we just wanted to look at options that were most feasible for ODOT facilities in particular.
Yeah, but because, yeah, this was limited to the deer carcasses, but like in talking with our companion DOTs, you know, a lot of people have other large carcasses to manage as well. So it's certainly some more robust composting efforts are going on out west. Incineration seemed to be a preferred Midwest method if roadside abandonment wasn't happening. So yeah, there were a lot of factors to try to compare apples to apples. But this scope was limited to Ohio. Again, ODOT has done a lot of research in the animal vehicle collision reduction world that has crossed the state borders and gone beyond.
Wonderful. All right, next question. Does anything restrict placing carcasses in normal trash dumpsters?
Not technically, no. As long as it's being, once you pick it up, it's considered a solid waste. So if it's going into a dumpster, that is a solid waste, that would not be. But however, you would have to have it disposed of pretty quickly, or you're going to run into your malodorous issues, aesthetics issues. And you could have, if your dumpster's not contained, if it's not watertight, then it could be leaking and you'd have a surface water issue as well. So I don't think, I would have to double check. I don't think there's anything that would prohibit it, especially when you think of when you do ash of the bodies, you can dispose that ash into a dumpster as well. So ultimately that product's getting there. Again, I would keep in mind on what your local landfill will accept though, because the landfills are the ones that kind of drove the need for this research too, because there's some of them that, and especially if they're privately held, they don't have to accept a carcass. So I would be very careful in doing that. And I will give a caveat that everything, any kind of carcass disposal needs should be aligned with the ODNR and EPA recommendations and regulations. And there are certain times of the season, there are certain counties in Ohio that you certainly could not do that. But ODNR has a lot of information online, especially with CWD carcass management, with their recommendations of how to handle that.
Very important to know. Thank you for that. Okay, next question. What is the average cost that contractors charge for disposal?
So our main case study was Utah. We did call around pest control services in Ohio, but they haven't seen a project of this scale or magnitude, so they were unfamiliar with it. So in Ohio, it's harder to estimate what that would cost, but in Utah, the contractors were basically paid around $1 to $2 per mileage to patrol these routes, and then whatever dump receipts they had, they invoiced that to UDOT. So again, it just varies based on the volume of carcasses and the size of these patrol routes.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've had a couple of people asked about copies of your slideshow, your presentation. So would you like to go ahead and touch on that subject again one more time?
Yeah, so this presentation will be uploaded, Kara, correct me if I'm wrong, it will be uploaded to the research website, but because this is not finalized, we don't have the materials to distribute without ODOT's blessing yet. However, it is very soon and forthcoming, and we are very excited to share it. We just want to make sure we share it after dotting our I's and crossing our T's. So the presentation itself will be available online, the video of it. And we can follow up with the ODOT team to see how soon we can get the other materials out. So again, feel free to reach out. Our emails are up there if you'd like to make sure you're getting those materials once they are published. The full research report dives a lot more into the costs and the safety measures and stuff with some of these questions that are coming in. So I do think it would be very helpful to have that full research report once it is finalized.
Wonderful. Okay. We have just a little bit of information. We have an attendee who says that they have previously utilized programs like Farmers Hunters Feeding the Hungry for freshly dispatched deer, and that they were able to calculate how much fresh meat was deferred to shelters, and then the other carcasses went to the landfill.
So unfortunately, like Sam touched on earlier, while there haven't been any cases of CWD prions infecting humans, we really don't want to test that theory. And so we want to avoid eating CWD infected meat. Prions, like we mentioned, it's very hard to kill them. And so that's just something we really want to consider. With EHD and bovine tuberculosis, humans can actually contract tuberculosis. Now, if you're properly cooking the meat, then it's fine. But again, you're going to have to make sure that that meat reaches a certain temperature to kill off those pathogens. So while this method might be fine in counties with very low pathogen prevalence, we want to make sure that we want to try to avoid it in CWD counties and in Southeast Ohio, where you just see deer with EHD all over the side of the road. So
I'll add on to that. Like, that was one of the deferred methods. I do think that that's awesome to be able to feed the hungry. If it's something that there's the proper testing in place, we did have donations as one of those deferred methods. It just wasn't something that we wanted to dive into the pros and cons and costs, because it wasn't something that was readily available in Ohio as a method that was feasible for them to use as a primary disposal method. But donations are certainly touched on in the research, and certainly if you can find the right avenues to get that those carcasses out and out safely to the public, absolutely, that's awesome.
for sure.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, let's see here.
Yeah,
Trying to make sure I'm making sense of these. Got more questions. Just want to make sure I've got the questions right.
Well, I stopped one task and I don't want to start another one.
Okay, so with roadside abandonment, are there any procedures in place to test for CWD and or trying to mitigate the disease leaching into the environment?
I would coordinate with ODNR on that. Certainly there's ODNR points of contact, and when we were coordinating with them, they already have folks that are out there trying to do educational awareness of CWD with maintenance staff at the county level, at the municipal level. So I would just want to make sure if you're just in alignment with what ODNR is also recommending.
Yeah, to my knowledge, there's not a way to instantaneously tell if a deer carcass has CWD out in the field. So there would be a delay time on determining whether or not that carcass is infected. But unfortunately, with roadside abandonment, you are still leaving this carcass out in the open. You can cover it, which can help hide it from the public and potentially from avian scavengers, but other animals have noses, and so they can come grab a bite, uncover the carcass, and you don't want to leave liners or any other type of containment system outside in the environment. And so unfortunately, there is a great risk of prions leaching into the environment and just sitting there.
And I would like to reiterate that CWD and prion research is still quite preliminary. There's a lot more research coming. So as we keep a pulse on that, these disposal methods can be and probably will be modified as we get more research and better guidance from the research community.
Yeah, just at this point, rather be safer than sorry.
Wonderful. Okay, let's see here. I was getting ready to say we're out of questions, and then right when I was getting ready to say that and you guys are finishing up, I had another question pop up, I think. Let me read through this quick. So someone wants to know if there was any thought about partnering with other state agencies to fund incinerator procurement, installation, and operation.
That was not brought up, but this is a wonderful community of DOT folks that I'm sure if we get some creative minds together, we could navigate that. I will say how I believe Kentucky, how they were funding their incineration purchases was just through their annual equipment fund. So, you know, instead of getting a new snowplow one year, maybe they would get an incinerator for their garage. So that was how they were funding it, was just through their equipment budgets. But yeah, creative mechanisms of funding are more than welcome, and this community has proven over and over again that we're all trying to elevate each other as we get through this research and navigate the same issues across state borders. So.
Thankfully, the nice thing with incinerators is that in Indiana, when we interviewed with them, since they've been using incinerators for so long, they've had the same units for 8 to 10 years in some instances, and so there is quite a long lifespan for these products, which, you know, there is a higher initial cost associated with these methods, but it certainly pays off down the road.
And the staff, the worker buy-in of incinerators was very prevalent, that they were excited to use them.
Yes, glowing reviews.
Glowing reviews.
From Indiana DOT.
Glowing flame reviews.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I do believe that is the last of our questions that we have for today from our attendees on today's webinar. Just double check, make sure someone doesn't send anything in real quick.
I will add that ODOT sponsored jerky stands was also a deferred method that we did not formally put in the report, but it was considered.
Oh, I do love me some deer jerky.
Same. Okay. Well, I would like to say thank you so much, Sam and Olive, for that very insightful presentation and for sharing your valuable knowledge and expertise with us. As I mentioned earlier, the recording of this webinar will be shared with all registered attendees. And if you are hoping to get a copy of the actual slideshow or presentation that they presented, please reach out to them at their email addresses that you see on your screen, or I believe Sam said that it will be posted on the research website once that's finalized. Before you leave, we would like to ask for you to share some of your feedback. So a very short 4-question survey will automatically launch in your browser once the webinar ends. It only takes a minute, and your input helps us to improve our future sessions. And with that, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We hope you found this webinar informative, engaging. I know that I did. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much.